Why doesn't everyone believe in Jesus? Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? I'm a Christian. But think about it for a second. I mean, surely if Jesus is God himself, it shouldn't be too hard for him to show us who he is. I mean, sure, the actual walking, talking, living, breathing Jesus I could actually see. He's long gone. But you'd think that everyone who actually saw him, those who were actually there, would have believed, wouldn't they? I mean, if he actually did all these big miracles, it would have just been staring at them in the face. I mean, surely everyone would have been like the disciples last week. They see Jesus do a miracle and, hey presto, they believe. Chapter 2, verse 11. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. It should be that simple, shouldn't it? Well, in John's Gospel, we see that belief, it really isn't that simple. You see, this is a gospel full of rejection, of disbelief, of people who look like they believe, and then, as we read on, we see they don't. And how can that make sense? Well, John shows us in our passage today that people don't believe in Jesus because he's not as they might expect. He isn't just the meek and mild picture from the children's storybook or the miracle slot machine, a kind of Father Christmas on steroids. No, he's the eternal judge with all authority over every single one of us. See, he won't stand for false religion. He demands a response of true belief, a response where we see who he is and we believe the words that he says about himself. Well, our first point today is that Jesus, he's not as we might expect. Jesus, he's not as we might expect. Let's dive in. Let me read from verse 13. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. It's the biggest day of the year in Jerusalem. This is the Passover. Everyone who's anyone would have been in the city. The temple, it would have been absolutely rammed. Think Mecca during the Hajj or Vatican City when a new pope is appointed. If you want to make a scene, I mean, this is just not the time for it. And so what Jesus does, it's simply outrageous. He walks in, he takes one long look, and then all his anger breaks loose. I mean, he's simply furious. Every last one of these money changers and animal sellers, they're chased out of the temple. It must have been chaos. Well, you can see why those around Jesus might have found him hard to believe in, can't you? I mean, this is astonishing. He's gone into the temple, that most holy of places, the place where God dwelt with his people. And he said, no, you're getting it all wrong. None of them would have been expecting this. And I guess, what possible reason could he have for doing this? Well, look with me at verses 16 to 17. And he told those who sold the pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. See, Jesus' problem, it's not that the temple is being used for corrupt purposes. His problem is that they've turned his Father's house into a market rather than being a place of solemn prayer. There's the bellowing of cattle and the bleating of sheep instead of brokenness and contrition, holy adoration and prolonged petition. There's just noisy commerce. This is not what the temple was for. Jesus, he's zealous for God's glory. He will not allow a sinful misuse of the temple. When he sees false religion, he won't stand for it. Growing up, my parents, they used to read me bedtime stories from a children's Bible. And I always remember the picture on the front of the book. It was you know the kind of picture. It was a really kindly looking Jesus with a big beaming smile, and he's got children all around him. I think one sitting on his knee. It's all very lovely, very twee. And I wonder if many of us have that kind of picture of Jesus in our heads. I mean, whatever he was nice, wasn't he? And yes, there's a lot of truth about that. But well, I hope you see that this episode challenges that view of Jesus a bit. You see, he's not as we might expect. If we want to understand who Jesus really is, then we need to have this picture of Jesus' righteous indignation at false religion. I sometimes hear people say, isn't Jesus in the New Testament completely different from the God we see in the Old Testament? But that just isn't right. See, Jesus, he's got exactly the same righteous anger at sin and religious hypocrisy as we see of God in the Old Testament. The real Jesus, yes, he was loving, he was compassionate, he was merciful, but he was also righteous, he was just, he was holy. He was not, maybe, as we might expect. Well, let's get plugged back into the narrative. As you can probably imagine, if you were on the wrong end of Jesus' righteous anger, you weren't going to be too comfortable with this kind of behaviour. And that's how the Jewish authorities feel. Verse 18, they say to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Basically, what on earth are you doing, Jesus? Who gave you the right to do this? And that takes us to our second point today. Jesus, he makes really big claims. Jesus, he makes really big claims. Look at what he says. Verse 19. Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" If the Jewish authorities were angry after Jesus had cleared them out of the temple, now they just think he's playing crazy. This is just ridiculous. This enormous temple, it's taken 46 years to build. And Jesus, he's acting like he could rebuild it like it's a little Lego house. I mean, this is just a crazy claim. Well, let's read on. But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. Now, I want you to see these are truly explosive words. You see, Jesus, he's telling the Jewish authorities that he is replacing the temple. They may well try to kill him. In fact, they will kill him, but his body, it won't be destroyed. He'll rise from the dead. You might remember that John told us earlier in his gospel, in chapter 1, verse 14, that Jesus was God himself dwelling with his people. Let me read it. "And the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory." And Jesus is showing us here that we can be certain that Jesus is God dwelling with his people, that he is replacing the temple as the place for man to meet God. We can be certain because he will be raised from the dead. This is big, isn't it? It's not every day that someone says they're going to rise from the dead and replace the whole system of relating to God, is it? And I guess, you can kind of see why the Jewish authorities wouldn't believe in Jesus. It was too big a claim for them to accept. How ridiculous to suggest that this guy would replace the temple. How ridiculous that this man in front of them would claim to be God himself, dwelling with his people. And don't many reject him today for similar reasons? Sure, Jesus, he may well have been a great teacher, but to claim to be God himself, to be the creator, to be the eternal judge, no, that's impossible. That's ridiculous. Well, that's why verse 22 is so important. Look with me. "When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken." See, John, he's the first to admit the disciples didn't really get it until they saw the risen Jesus. recalled his words, and understood how Jesus fulfilled the scripture. John, he wants us to believe, not just because of the signs, but because of Jesus' words as well. We need both. We've been asking, why doesn't everyone believe in Jesus? Well, maybe better would be to conclude, what would it take for us to believe? What does it look like to believe? See, for us to really believe in Jesus, yes, we need to look at what he did. We need to see that he really did rise from the dead. So if you're looking into Christianity, go away and look into the evidence for the resurrection. There's lots. But we need to do more than just look at what he did. We need to be like the disciples and see what he means. We need to believe the words Jesus said about himself. We need to allow him to speak about himself, and we need to believe him when he tells us who he is. See, Jesus, he's got every right to clear out the temple because he's the God-man who's making a new way for his people to know God. And how can I know this? Well, I can see what he's done, and I can see what he's claimed about himself. And really, there's no other conclusion but to believe. Well, I'm sure that's given us lots to think about, and I posted some questions below if you want to carry on thinking about what we've looked at today. But if not, we'll see you again next week.